Get on this side, sure. We're good.
Good morning. Thank you all for coming today. Welcome to Fayette County and welcome to our new facility. We've had the opportunity today to meet with Governor DeWine. He's come down to visit. We consider it a privilege that the governor was able to come to Fayette County and view our facility, but more importantly, to talk about some pressing law enforcement issues that's not only affecting Fayette County, the state of Ohio, but across the country. And we've had a very good and in-depth conversation. We were very fortunate to have our state senator, Bob Peterson, and Mark Johnson, our state representative, involved in this because everything we do in law enforcement is legislative based. We are a state, and the legislature decides what we do. What the sheriff does even decides what the governor does. And we understand that and the value we have in our legislature. And the fact the legislature's made a lot of decisions and are going to be making a lot more decisions in the immediate future for law enforcement and in our communities. And we felt it was really imperative that our legislators be involved in this conversation. We hope that they're able to take back from our conversations to their the other legislatures, and they can guide some legislation from some effective, meaningful legislation that's going to dictate the future of law enforcement in Fayette County and in the state of Ohio. So I'd like to introduce at this point my friend and my governor, Mike DeWine.
Vern, thank you very much. Fran and I are always happy to be in Fayette County. It's good to be back. We are very fortunate in Ohio, not only to have great sheriffs, but we also have a sheriff who is now the president of the National Sheriff's Association. So, Vern, we are very proud of you. It gives the sheriff an opportunity not just to talk to other sheriffs in Ohio, but to talk to sheriffs across the country. And we wanted to stop here today to kind of get briefed on what he is seeing in Ohio, what he is seeing outside Ohio, what he's hearing about what's going on at the border. We talked about that. He's hearing a lot from the sheriffs along the border. This is not an easy time for law enforcement. This is a tough time. And if you talk to chiefs of police, you talk to mayors, you talk to sheriffs, what they will tell you is recruitment is tougher and retention is tougher. The legislature took some action in this budget that in the months ahead is going to help and is going to make a great deal of difference. We're also going to be proposing some additional things for the legislature to look at and to consider to help law enforcement as well. But let's start just a couple things that were in the budget that was just been passed by the state legislature and that we're very, very proud of. First is what we call ONEC. This really is taking criminal intelligence analysts and computer forensic specialists and making them available to law enforcement around the state of Ohio. In our first budget, after I became governor, we set up ONEC in Columbus and Cleveland. This budget is setting it up in Cincinnati, Butler County, as well as Toledo. So we're covering pretty much all of the state. And really, one of the biggest changes I've seen in law enforcement in the last few years is, how cell phones are being used and the data that's collected. And many times police will seize these, but they will not really have the capability or the time to pull that data down. And so this makes it available, these forensic experts available to our sheriffs as well as to our smaller chiefs of police, small police departments. Second thing I think that's very important in this budget is we have additional money for our drug task forces. We asked the sheriff, where are the drugs coming in? And they're coming through Dayton. They're coming originally from Detroit, coming across our border to Detroit, down to Dayton, down to Columbus. And the drug task forces that we are funding in the state are focused in Dayton, they're focused in Columbus, and focused in other areas. So that does have a huge impact here in Fayette County as well. So these multi-jurisdiction drug task forces really make a difference. Third thing I would mention about the budget is when we just put the announcement out that this money is now available, and that is body cameras. We're seeing tremendous interest from departments around the state of Ohio in regard to body cameras, and again, many times they do not have the money. But the state legislature in this budget put money in for body cameras. We are seeing a continued problem in Ohio with overdose deaths and people just overdosing even though they're able to survive. So it continues to be a problem in the state. These drugs are what's causing 80 to 90% of the deaths is fentanyl. Fentanyl is coming from China. Despite the fact that China denies it, it's coming from China. It's going into Mexico, and then it's coming up through our southern border. So this is something that we have to continue to focus on. I think our federal officials have to focus on China and putting more pressure on China to stop this from coming out of China. And we've got to do, of course, more along the southern border as well. We are now in discussions with the state legislature about additional dollars. We have federal dollars that came in regard to the coronavirus, and we're discussing with the General Assembly now some additional ideas about how to spend those dollars. And one of the things that we would like to see is for some of those dollars to be spent on law enforcement, because law enforcement certainly has been hit very, very hard by the problem of COVID, and it's been hit in many different ways. So let me just stop. Senator Bob Peters. Bob, come on up.
Thank you, Governor. It's great to be with you.
Always good to be in your district.
You're always welcome. We're glad to have you here. It's a short drive from Cedarville.
It is.
Excited to be here. Certainly want to echo the comments of my dear friend, Sheriff Vernon Stanforth. It's exciting to have an individual representing us at the highest levels of the Buckeye Sheriff Association, National Sheriff Association, serving as president. That's very exciting. Vernon will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he's the smallest county population sheriff to serve as president in the history of the organization. And that's a credit to Fayette County. But more importantly, it's a credit to Vernon Stanforth, and we're very proud of him here in Fayette County. So excited. We're also very proud of our law enforcement, and that's why it was easy working with my colleagues in the legislature, especially Representative Johnson, to make sure that there's funding available to support law enforcement. They've got one of the most difficult jobs in the world to do. They don't get called in when people are happy. They come and solve problems, sometimes life-threatening problems. And we wanted to support them. And with technology and some of the things we're able to do in the budget, we're able to do a better job of making sure that they're safe and the people that we serve collectively are safe. So excited to continue to have a discussion. Proud of the governor's leadership on law enforcement. He has a passion for this. I think going back to his days as a prosecutor and certainly as Attorney General, to make sure that law enforcement is supported, have the tools and training that they need to succeed. And I'd like to introduce my colleague in legislature, Representative Mark Johnson, who serves this area.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Governor, for coming to Fayette County. I always say to my colleagues in Columbus, Ohio, some of the best people in Ohio are right here in Washington Courthouse, Fayette County area. We had some great discussions, about 45 minutes worth of discussions on what we can do for law enforcement, and we also added in corrections. And since I've become the state representative for this district, it covers Chillicothe and the Orient Prison, and I visited those facilities, and all of them are short on correction officers. And it's just a continuing problem. It's something we need to address. And we have shortage of officer recruitment and retention. So, you know, we need to do what we can do with and give them the tools to not only to do their jobs, but to also to recruit the officers for the future. So it's on our wavelengths. We appreciate your efforts. The federal money is one-time money, so it's going to be a continuing effort. We need to find the money in the budget, in future budgets coming down. So I appreciate my friend Vernon Stanforth. I echo what Bob had to say, and I have the utmost respect when it comes to law enforcement issues. If he makes a phone call to me, I listen. And so anyway, thank you all for coming to Fayette County. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. We're happy to take any questions.
So Governor, you talked about some changes you're going to be making. You mentioned the budget, but some future things. Can you discuss what those future things are that your administration is going to work on?
Well, we're looking, frankly, we've been talking with the Buckeye Sheriff's Association, we've been talking to different sheriffs, we've been talking to chiefs of police, and really trying to understand exactly what their needs are. The body camera situation, virtually every department now wants body cameras. The money that we have set aside so far has been very flexible, because what we find is that some of them tell us, look, we can buy the body cameras, but it's storing the data and managing that is really very, very expensive. So we're still in the listening stage at this point, but as you know, there is about $850 million left in the federal dollars for this year, and we need to be, coming up with ways to actually spend that money. As Senator Peterson said, it's one-time dollars. So we don't want to create new programs with it, but we do want to take care of specific problems that we have. So we'll be going to the legislature in the future with some ideas. One of the things we actually spent some time talking about today is something that's near and dear to the sheriff's heart, and that is police training. He's been intimately involved in police training and training of law enforcement officers for several decades. We have to figure out how are we in the state going to supply police training, particularly to our small police departments that frankly many times do not have the money. So this is the continuing training, not the initial training, but the continuing training that we want every law enforcement officer in the state to have. We have about 30,000 law enforcement officers, and whether they're in Washington Courthouse, Cedarville, or Columbus, they deserve to be trained well every single year, and the citizens of those communities deserve to have them trained well. So trying to bring some uniformity to police training is something that I think all of us are committed to. We don't have the answer yet, but we do have, in the last budget, created a working group, and we are about to announce in the next few days our appointments to that working group. I know the legislature is going to do the same thing, and we hope that working group will then be able to really focus on how we're going to deal with police training law enforcement training over a long period of time.
Governor? David Winter with Channel 12 out of Cincinnati. Thanks for taking the time to take the questions. We wanted to ask you about the body cams as well. You announced yesterday the $5 million that's now available. $5 million seems like a drop in the bucket compared to what it costs departments to not only buy the hardware, but maintain the systems. Is it enough?
No, it's a start. We have to make a start, and we've done that. We've got authorization through the budget by the General Assembly to start down the pathway with body cameras. We hope, my intention is, when we come back to the legislature with additional proposals, this is one-time money that can at least be spent to get the body cameras and at least to get started. So we're going to have additional proposals that you're going to see coming forward in regard to body cameras. So this is a beginning.
And then secondly, it's 2021. Obviously, last summer with Black Lives Matter protests and so forth, this was brought to the forefront for police department and sheriff's department accountability. It's 2021. What has taken the state so long to even divvy out $5 million for this kind of thing?
Well, the budget is only passed once every 2 years. And we're moving very quickly. The budget was passed the latter part of June. Money's going to be going out. So we have more work to do. But let me say that it's not just body cameras. It is police training, which is certainly very, very important. So there's a lot of things that we need to do. In our budget proposal that the legislature passed, we also have money in there in regard to helping police departments with recruitment, helping police departments with retention. So this is an ongoing process. We're started down that pathway. We have a ways to go, but at least we're started.
Sheriff, can you talk a little bit more about what you're seeing as far as this public safety crisis and why more money needs to be given in? I understand a rise in overdoses, but can you talk a little bit more about what sheriffs are telling you they're seeing across the state?
Lack of funding. Budgets have been modified by the legislative process at the local level, state level. They need to start focusing on funding law enforcement so that we can make solid plans for training and distributing our manpower. And that's what we're seeing. We can't be pulling people off the street. We need to be putting people on the street to patrol. And that's going to, I think that may start curtailing some of the crime that we're seeing in some of our communities by putting officers back onto the street. And that takes money. We're not seeing, one time I would have a file cabinet full of applicants. And now I'm lucky to have a file folder that may have a couple applicants in it at any given time. And that's the dynamic that's changed over the course of several years. And we need to, we need to be able to pay our deputies comparable to the public sector, private sector, so they will stay in service to their communities. Instead of jumping around as quickly as they're jumping, they're following the dollar. And we're a small county. It's difficult for us to come up with, to compare against the Warren counties, the Butler counties, the Franklin counties, who have a much bigger tax base. So we have to look at the legislature to balance that need that we have in local communities, smaller communities.
So the lack of funding is resulting in fewer officers on the street to deal with things like overdoses and drugs coming in. Is that?
Yeah, the funding is a big issue. That's not the only issue, but it's a paramount issue. We have to have the money to pay these deputies, to train them, to respond to the new types of crimes that we're responding to, or the volume of crime we're responding to. One of the things we talked about was a new initiative we're doing at the national level is trying to get a mental health app available to law enforcement, because they're suffering just as much when they go out and find dead bodies from overdoses. And they do this day in and day out. The trauma that the deputies are seeing, dealing with the victims who are traumatized, and we're absorbing that, and we have no outlet for that. And then we're seeing the rise of the number of deputies and police officers are leaving the career because they can't handle that trauma, or that they're actually taking their own lives. So we have to be able to address that at the same time as we're looking at the funding issue.
Obviously, a lot of people calling for law enforcement reform. How do you make sure that you're getting quality candidates in the door and not just anybody who wants a job?
And that's the issue we've been dealing with for many years. Is right now anybody who wants to be a law enforcement can take the law enforcement training. That doesn't mean they're going to get into law enforcement. That just means they have the training. And that's one of the things we've been grappling with for many years is where do we do our due diligence and to recruit the right people for the right job. And sometimes we need to take our blinders off and look at the broader scope and find out, if we train these people, then it's the local agency's going to decide who they're going to hire. We don't want to be dictating that from the state level.
Sheriff, can you talk?
Let me just add something to that.
Go ahead.
I just want to add something to what the sheriff said. Look, this is a difficult time to be in law enforcement. It is the mental health challenges, the trauma that police deal with every single day is very, very important. So, we are looking at proposals and working with the legislature to try to address that as well. We also have talked about police reform. I think there's a general consensus that there's things that need to be done. Body cameras is only one of those things. We have a bill that we have proposed in front of the General Assembly that I think has broad support. It has broad support, and we hope to see it pass this year, which does make some of these changes in regard to law enforcement and some of the reforms that we've talked a lot about.
So Sheriff,
We will always have reactionary law enforcement, but we need to start having proactive law enforcement. And that's something that we put that to the side and almost forgot about it. We had the days back in the 80s and 90s when we had, very proactive law enforcement. That's almost gone now. And we need to reinstitute a lot of those ideas. And I think that's what our community is saying. They just don't want reactionary. They want proactive. So we can go into the communities and help solve those problems, the societal issues within our communities. And, if law enforcement is going to play a part in that, we need to start practicing that, instead of reactive, we need to start practicing proactive
So
policing.
you should ask the questions, not me, but describe proactive law enforcement.
can you
Because I've
step
heard
up
you,
to the microphone, please?
you guys should ask the questions, but describe proactive law enforcement, because I know you've done this before, and I know you give great
It's where
answers.
you go in and you become part of the community. And in Fayette County, our deputies are part of the community. We live here, we shop here, our children are educated here, and that needs to be the same across, and I think in metropolitan areas. You need to have that buy-in to your communities, and law enforcement needs to buy in and be part of that community and reflect that community. And I think that's a lot of what we're seeing from the people throughout our, that are saying they want reform, is they want law enforcement to buy into the community. They shouldn't have to buy into law enforcement, but law enforcement should be buying into them and being part of the community effectively.
So Sheriff, in reference to body cams, the public also wants accountability. From an Ohio standpoint, do you have any idea how many law enforcement as a percentage does not have body cams, what the cost is, and how important you feel that accountability is?
We all have to be accountable, regardless of whether I don't think we need to be accountable necessarily to the level of all the body, and that's the issue, I think, is body cameras they want it released immediately. And sometimes that can't be done. It's an investigatory tool that needs to play out, and that, whatever that case may be. But there needs to be an accountability, and that starts from the moment we make contact with the citizen. And, but that has to be judged by a different set of eyes, and we have a judicial system to do that. But they have the ability now to review, with body cameras, to review that in actual time. And there's flaws to the body camera system, but still, those are things that we work out as we move into the new, and the technology that's available today that wasn't available 4 or 5 years ago, or 10 years, how far back? We haven't had body cameras that long, but each year becomes more available and more easily accessible. And I think that's what this grant money is going to be able to do, is actually put that in the hands of agencies that weren't able to afford it before, and for the long-term operation of a body camera system.
So Sheriff, you're also chairman of the Peace Officer Training Commission, and I know recently I talked with you about recruitment issues. The governor's also mentioned that there's an issue with recruitment. His office recently did a pilot program with universities and local departments. I know you recently discussed about looking at the fitness requirements. I talked with some commanders recently that say they'll get recruits that apply, but they can't pass the state test for fitness, and so they don't get these officers certified. I was looking at some states recently. Most states like Virginia, they have less fitness requirements than Ohio. Can you talk a little bit about the status that your commission and panel at the Peace Officers Training Association on the fitness requirements, and is that going to play a role on future recruitments?
Well, we know that physical fitness is one of the things that we've grappled with over the last several years in law enforcement across the board, across the country. And we put in the standards, and those standards, it's now evolved into a new era. And we now need to look, is that standard suitable for 2021 and recruitment? Are we eliminating a lot of our potential candidates because they can't run a mile and a half? But we have to look deeper. So why do we want them to run a mile and a half? It's not to see how fast you can run in a mile and a half time. We're not developing marathon runners. We're developing cardiovascular strength, so that when you're in a situation, and we just had a death of an officer this past week in the United States. I can't cite the agency, but he was involved in a pursuit, and when he got out, they were working it, and he dropped dead from a heart attack. So that is was his heart able to withstand that? And that's where physical fitness standards come into play. Is that officer able to withstand the physical trauma that's involved in fighting somebody in the middle of the night in a back alley? Is he able to do that? And that's why we put those standards into play. And that's what we had, but it's time to reevaluate that. And that's what I've done as chairman, is I've tasked a committee within the commission to look at the standard and see where we need to be in 2021, 2022 with physical fitness standards.
Governor, COVID within law enforcement. I was talking with a police chief yesterday in Southern Ohio. He says that law enforcement do not get reimbursed for officers who are off for COVID leave and that they're having to use their personal sick leave. Is there any plans to perhaps help compensate law enforcement agencies to offset COVID sickness leave versus these officers having to use their personal time?
Yeah, that's certainly something that we can look at. Obviously, you want to encourage, law enforcement and help them if they're off COVID. We obviously encourage law enforcement to get vaccinated. That's the best way to ensure that, don't end up in the hospital. So again, the message to everyone, of course, is get vaccinated. But as far as those money, sure, those are things that we could certainly look at. We have, talking with the General Assembly.
Governor, another COVID question, especially on the heels yesterday of the
It wasn't the whole press conference about COVID questions.
You thought those were done, right? No, they appear not to be done. And how do we get that to a point where those aren't? We're not getting COVID questions, especially yesterday with the Children's Hospital officials coming out with some dire warnings. We're also seeing some schools having to close because of quarantines and the like. How do we get to a point where we stop that? And the way I understand the law is you can institute a 30-day health order before the legislature can revoke that.
No, the way the law reads is passed by the General Assembly. We can put on a health order, but that health order can be taken off the next day if the legislature, both the Senate and House, by resolution vote to do that. So there's no 30-day period. It's entirely up to the legislature, and they can revoke that health order. So that's what the law is. Look, the message yesterday, I think, was very, very strong from the CEOs of all our children's hospitals in the state. And I would just invite anyone who has not looked at to pull it up on the internet, and it's about 50 minutes long, and listen to what the CEOs of these children's hospitals are saying. Their message is very, very clear. They want kids in school. It's in the best interest of children to be in school. Children can have mental health problems when they're not in school. Those can go up. And what the children's hospitals were saying to us yesterday is the best way to keep kids in school is, number one, parents have your child vaccinated if your child is old enough to be vaccinated. And number two, if your child is not old enough to be vaccinated, then wear a mask at school. And the children's hospitals were asking every school district in the state of Ohio, both public and private, to institute a mask mandate for the immediate future until we can get through this problem. So I think, if I could just finish. So I think that the pathway is very clear. I looked at the numbers this morning. Out of the school districts in the state of Ohio, the best we could tell as of this morning, 40% of the students in public schools in Ohio were going to school this morning in a school that required masks K through 12. The message from the children's hospitals is that number has to increase, and it needs to increase very quickly.
Governor, can you at least talk, what can you do? What else is there? I mean, are you pretty much throwing up your hands now and saying, well, I mean, what can you do to help the problem of children getting COVID at a huge, alarming rate?
Look, I spent some time this weekend talking to school superintendents around the state. I talked yesterday to all the superintendents of the Catholic dioceses in the state. Talked talked with them and had Dr. Vanderhoff on the call so that they would understand exactly what we are facing. I will continue every chance I get, no matter who I'm talking to say that if you want your child in school, you need to get that child vaccinated. And if that child is not old enough to be vaccinated, what you need to do is have that child wear a mask to go to school. I'll continue to say to all the school superintendents in the state of Ohio, if you want your school to stay open, if you want kids not to be quarantined, the best way to do that is to put a mask mandate on, at least for the immediate future until we get through this, requiring every student who comes in to wear a mask. That is our ticket out. Vaccination's number one. Child cannot be vaccinated, then the mask. And the thing I would point out is that while adults can make choices about this, and adults can decide they don't want to be vaccinated, we need to respect that. When you're dealing with children who are in school, it's not their choice. Most of them do not have the ability to get vaccinated, and those that are old enough to get vaccinated have to have parental permission to do that. So we have to do more to take care of those kids and to keep them out of the hospital. And the other problem about the hospitals, not just kids going in with COVID, and the message from the children's hospitals yesterday was very clear. Their ability to care for non-COVID problems is being imperiled. Their ability to handle your child, if your child has a trauma or any other kind of problem, that is being hurt by the fact that there's so many kids now coming in for COVID and other respiratory problems. I think it was a very, very clear message yesterday from our children's hospital.
Real quick, some reaction to the Nan Whaley news that came out today.
Question.
I'm sorry?
Some reaction to the Nan Whaley news, the breaking news that.
I don't know what the breaking news is, I'm sorry.
There were some search warrants that were unsealed today that showed the FBI was suspected at one point that she maybe had been taking some bribes. No charges were ever filed. It's not clear where the investigation came from there.
Look, I know nothing about it.
Would you have issued health orders, Governor, if you weren't afraid?
Last question, go ahead.
Would you have issued health orders if you weren't afraid that the legislator would overturn it?
I deal with the world as I find it and the way the world is, and I don't spend a lot of time speculating what would have happened if something else happened. So look, we have done well throughout this, despite horrible tragedies and the loss of over 20,000 Ohioans. We've done the best we can. We are moving forward as a state. But if we are going to protect the most vulnerable among us, the most vulnerable among us are our children. And to protect our children, we need to get them vaccinated, and we need to have them wearing masks in school. Everyone, every scientist, every health official, all our children's hospitals agree with that. And that's what we have to do. And my job is to continue to talk about it every chance I get, because we need to do it. We're at 40% now of these kids covered. We need to get those numbers up higher. Thank you all very much.